Welcome to the part 4 of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems sessions. And I want to thank Amanda Kissel from Simon Fraser University. She's a PhD student there. She's arranged a session on climate change and freshwater wetlands and adaptation research and management presentations today. So I want to thank you, Amanda, for putting together this session. And Amanda's going to facilitate. I think the structure is going to be having 4 talks. We're going to hold the questions to the end and have all 4 or 5 of our speakers actually come up to the table and do a Q&A session from after the presentations. So Amanda, thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this symposium on wetlands and climate change. And just a note that I'm actually just filling in for Maureen Ryan, who couldn't be here today. And a lot of this symposium was organized by Maureen and Megan and Sayun, who you'll hear from in a minute. So this symposium was kind of born out of the Wetlands Adaptation Group, and they have a lot of ongoing projects that address wetlands and climate change and how we translate the science into on-the-ground adaptation tools. So these are just some of the people involved in the group. It's a large and diverse group made up of folks from universities, NGOs, and government agencies. And this group came together a few years ago to try to address some of the unmet calls for wetland adaptation in the face of climate change, and to bring more awareness to wetlands and kind of their inherent value to us. So a couple years ago, they held a symposium, the Pacific Northwest Wetlands Symposium here in Seattle, where we brought together practitioners and scientists to try to figure out how we develop some of these tools for managers and how we get the science into a form that managers can use. So today's session is going to be kind of an overview of what we've learned so far. We'll hear a little bit about some of the current applications, and then the important part is at the end we want to have a discussion where we get your input on where we should go from here. So some of the key findings that have come out of these projects are some promising new approaches to mapping wetlands, which Megan will talk about. We've been able to reconstruct historical hydrologic data, and this will allow us to kind of look at the climate impacts into the future. But there are some continuing challenges. The first being that there are still a lot of data limitations, and this results in some methodological hurdles that we're still trying to overcome. Also, wetlands are really diverse, and it's hard to come up with a management plan and apply this to such a wide variety of wetland types. And then we have this thing we call the loading dock problem, which is basically how do we translate the science into these on-the-ground tools for wetland adaptation. So we'll kind of come back to that at the end. Okay, so now I want to switch gears a bit and talk about kind of what climate change means for wetlands in the Pacific Northwest. So we know that we're going to see strong warming in all seasons, especially in the summer. And we're going to see relatively small changes in the amount of precipitation. However, we're going to see a lot of changes in the timing and the form of precipitation, which has a lot of implications for wetlands. So basically, we're going to see wetter falls, winters and springs, and drier summers. And some of you guys might recognize this figure from yesterday. And basically, it's showing that at high elevations, we're going to see a large decrease in summer stream flow and runoff at high elevations. But we also, what's not shown here, but we also know that we're going to see a lot of wetland surface area reduction even at lower elevations. So all these things put together create a water storage problem in which wetlands that used to hold water through the summer are going to dry more frequently and sooner. So this is kind of the focal region that we've been monitoring over the past couple years. And these sites kind of represent areas that we think are sensitive to climate, and we'll kind of elaborate on that in some of the later talks. And we've framed this work around 4 central challenges. So the first challenge is that we don't often know where wetlands are. And many of the old maps that we have are wrong or incomplete. The second challenge is that wetlands are very dynamic. They can change greatly in scope over the course of just a few months. And so this makes them sensitive to climate change. Also, wetlands are understudied. And so we have a lot of, or we don't have a lot of data, and we don't have a lot of baseline data to be able to project forward under the uncertainty of climate change. And finally, all these problems are compounded when we go to actually try to manage wetlands. Okay, so to try to address some of these issues, Maureen Ryan has set up a large-scale field project in which she's monitoring over 120 wetlands across Washington. And she's basically set up a system to monitor drying rates where she has temperature sensors in a transect along a wetland, little eye buttons, and she puts eye buttons in the wetland and then a calibration wetland or eye button on the side of the wetland. And when those kind of reach the same temperature, that's an indication of drying. So she's doing this on a huge number of ponds. And I recently kind of jumped on board, and I'm using a subset of those ponds to look at the effects of how drying rates are going to affect Cascades frogs populations specifically. Then we have Megan, who is working on mapping wetlands. So she's going to talk in a minute about some of the remote sensing tools that she's developing to try and create better maps for these wetlands. Sayun is going to talk about how she's using hydrologic data to look at the impacts of climate change on wetlands. And then we're going to hear from some of our practitioners. We're going to hear from Regina Rochefort, who's working on a project with Barbara Samora at the National Park Service. And we're going to hear from Mike Rule, who is going to talk about managing wetlands in the Turnbull Lakes area in eastern Washington.